Really weird stuff. That's very weird.
Welcome to a very special episode of Really Weird Stuff, a Twin Peaks podcast. This is Baxter. In addition to podcasting, I write movie reviews for the website Hammer to Nail, and my very wise editor, Don Lewis, pinged me to review a new documentary called I Know Catherine, The Log Lady. It's about Catherine Coulson, and it's directed and edited by Richard Green, who, in addition to having an extensive music and performance career, also directed a documentary in 2001 called I Don't Know Jack, which was about Jack Nance, Catherine's ex-husband, and Pete Martell from Twin Peaks. You will also recognize Richard Green as the magician in Mulholland Drive.
No, Hay Banda!
I watched the film. I loved it. I wrote my review, and then his publicist came back with the offer to interview Richard as well. So obviously I had to make that happen. So basically, this is a crossover episode. Hammer to Nail and Really Weird Stuff presents a Really Weird Stuff special. An interview with Richard Green, director of I Know Catherine, The Log Lady. Richard was so nice and fun and insightful, and he said he'd love to be a guest on a future episode, so we're holding him to it. Check out Hammer to Nail for my review of the movie, and please enjoy my conversation with Richard Green.
Really weird stuff.
Hello. It's lovely to meet you.
Likewise. How are you and where are you?
I'm in Seattle.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow, wonderful.
and I'm great. It's a beautiful day here today.
It's a beautiful city.
Oh yeah, I love it. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. Well, thank you so much for reading me today. I loved your movie. It was just such a moving depiction. I mean, I already knew a little bit from just reading about it and then, of course, seeing The Return. But there was so much I didn't know, so thank you for filling in all those blanks.
It's a pleasure to have you watch it, and I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you.
So you met Catherine in the early 70s in San Francisco, is that right?
Actually, I never met her in San Francisco. She had been in San Francisco, and then she moved down to LA, went to AFI. And I moved up to San Francisco right about the same time and started a theater company that all of the people who had been in hers, the circus, migrated into ours, Theater of Marvels. I met Jack up there, but I didn't meet Catherine until I came down. It was 73. I was 20. I was on my way to hitchhike around Europe for a year to do the hippie adventure, right? And I ended up auditioning for something that one of Catherine's close friends, Frankie Phipps Wilson, was in Los Angeles and staying in LA for an extra 12 weeks. And in that time, the place I hung out was in Beechwood Canyon with Catherine and Jack at their apartment, where David was also living at the time. And it was just fun. It was a great place to hang out. Jack was hysterical. David was charming. And Catherine would constantly make sure you had enough to eat and drink. Heaven.
That sounds divine, yes. Do you remember your first interaction with her, or an early memory of meeting Catherine?
You know, I do, but it's very vague. And you know how when you add new information to old memories, like, you know, I hung out at that place for 12 weeks, and then I never went back, even though for a year of the time I was at Cal Arts, a couple of years later, I actually lived 2 blocks away from that apartment. Catherine was probably still living there. I never made the connection. And so my first memory of her is vague, but it is coming up the stairs. I know exactly the stairs, just going into the apartment, which my friend lives in now. And I just remember Jack and David at a table and Catherine coming out of the kitchen, always sort of popping in one of those things that the stove and the sink are right there by the door. And she would pop her head out. Can I get you anything? And, you know, kind of the singing. You know, half of it's probably fantasy, but I just remember her as everything being musical. The way she moved and the way she talked and the way she laughed had kind of a musical rhythm to it. It was different than anybody that I knew. That's what I remember about Catherine. And then, just her and Jack kind of.
Yeah, we've heard about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So as a person who mostly knew Catherine from her work with David Lynch, I was really struck by her extensive theater career in Oregon. Did you ever get a chance to see her perform on stage?
I never did. Neither did David, actually. Of course, David was by design.
I never really talked to her about how she went on to become an actress up in Oregon. You work with people, actors, and your memories are working together. And then they go off and do another character, another film, and all this kind of stuff. In a weird way, you don't really want to know about that. You just want to, keep this for yourself, this part,
Me, I just didn't get the chance. But interestingly enough, in our film, we talk about Into the Woods, and there's one moment where we see Catherine. It's part of Into the Woods. It's a film projection of Catherine as the giant, right? And in our film, actually, it's not in the feature, but it's in the 3-part series. We see the giant, and we hear the giant say, thank you, and it's a part of it. That role of her playing the giant on film in a theater production is being revamped. I think it's September, or maybe even starts in the summer, at Ashland, at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. They are doing another production of Into the Woods, and they are using Catherine Coulson's film for the part of the giant. So Catherine, on the 10th anniversary of her passing, is coming back to Oregon, to the OSF, to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, to perform in Into the Woods. And just as a side note, I think you'd appreciate this. Our second theatrical booking, or third, was at the Ashland Independent Film Festival. And we screened for 4 days, 4 sold-out screenings with Q&As afterward, because everybody just, they love Catherine. And it's like she's a legend and a god. They also held the film over for 2 weeks after the film festival. The local theater is screening the film for a 2-week run. And I can't tell you the amount of affection for her, real, honest affection for her from that audience was just mind-boggling. And on the other side of it, just how much they loved the film, how much they got to learn as well, even though they knew her from theater. It was almost life-changing for a filmmaker. You don't get people responding to you personally, especially we were going to go straight to digital release. We weren't planning theatrical, and David's passing kind of opened the door. People just kept coming at us, please come and screen the film. And I never would have had the experience if we'd gone straight to digital that I'm having now, which is being able to sit with an audience and feel them get every joke, and even the ones that I forgot that we put in, and the movement and the tears at the end. It's been a wonderful experience. I am eternally grateful to both Catherine and David for making it possible.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. And it is so true that I've noticed that just in Seattle, there are so many tributes to him ever since he passed, and it's been since January. There's still like David Lynch festivals and re-releasing his movies, and all the independent theaters. Like the theatrical experience is getting a second wind because of him, and I think he'd love that.
I think he would love it, and from my experience now, because I've been to these independent theaters across the country. We've been to New York, and we've been to Ohio, we've been to Chicago, and the film is playing in cities all across the country. What I think is happening, and maybe it's wishful thinking, but it really seems like it's possible, is that theaters, film theaters, are now becoming the water cooler. They're now becoming the social gathering place, because where else do we go? You can't have a conversation at a rock concert. Everything's too loud. You're there, you just absorb it. But at a theater, you go, you're with an audience, you're responding, you're listening, you're laughing, you're crying, you're mingling, you're drinking, you're waiting in the bathroom line. And the communal theater, and most of these independent theaters have multiple screens. So you're really bringing community together. Where else do we do that in our culture? In sports and in rock concerts and stuff, there's really not that interaction. Yeah. Maybe in a baseball game, there's a lot of time to talk to your neighbors, but I really feel, and most of the theater owners that I'm meeting are really committed to the idea of local independent cinema. And having all come off of COVID, we've all been to movies, I'm sure, since COVID, but remembering what it's like to sit in an audience, a full audience. Yeah. That's been the other thing is, there's a big difference between 300 people watching something together and 5 people watching something together.
Yeah, very much.
A laugh will start in one end of the room and just carry through and build because you become something more. You become an audience together experiencing something. It's a very humanizing process.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So
beautiful.
I hope that independent theaters thrive.
Gosh, me too. Yeah, we have some really great ones here, but it's nice to hear that it's happening other places too.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I moved here was because of the independent theaters. So obviously a highlight of your film is the interview with David, because you didn't give that many interviews. And I really loved reading about your experience in other interviews talking to him. You described it as a performance. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So I don't know that I used that term. If I did, I probably used it in a specific way.
Editor's note. For clarity on this question, the interview I was referring to is from the website CinemaFemme, an April 12th, 2025 interview with Richard Green, and the full quote from that article is, quote, "When I interviewed David in 2017 for the documentary on Catherine, it gave me my vision for the film. Interviewing David was like performing for him. He got from me what he gave me, and that's why the interview is so emotional." End quote.
I'll tell you how I feel about it, though.
Okay.
You know, I've been an actor all my life. I'm really a storyteller, and acting is one of the skills, and I write songs and I make this movie. All of us storytellers, we're the same, including artists. You know, Picasso worked in 10 different kinds of mediums. You know, in terms of what is art, it's the perspective of the person and whatever skills and methodology that they use to express that. I had a great teacher, Robert Benedetti, who once said that style was the pathway from intention to execution. It's what happens when you get the idea, and by the time it gets out, that's the style. I thought that was a very accurate description. As an actor, the greatest experience I ever had in a film or television thing, including the stuff I've directed myself in, was working with David Lynch in Mulholland Drive. He knew my work from those many years ago when I met Catherine, and I was doing a show here in LA. I used to do improvised verse with an English accent. That was my act. It was a street act that I then translated to theaters for a while. And David used to come and watch me do that at this place called the Mayfair Music Hall here in Los Angeles. It's no longer around, but it was an English-style music hall, and I was on the bill, and I had a drinks budget. So David and Jack, who loved to drink, would come a couple of times a week and watch me do my act so they could sit and drink, you know, on the house. And I think they liked the act. So years later, when David called me and said, "I've been looking for a role for you for 40 years, Richard." I went, okay, and then jumped in. And that experience was amazing. He sent me 7 pages in English. And at the end of the phone call, this had to happen in a couple of days, he asked me to translate it to English and French and Spanish. I said, "Okay, have you got a translator?" And he said, "Here's my home number, Richard. Call me tomorrow." And of course, he wasn't there. And I called other people and I translated. And all of a sudden, I had this 7-page scene was now 21 pages because it was in 3 languages. And I had less than 48 hours to memorize it. And I thought, I don't want to memorize 3 different. It's how. And for some reason, I felt, I don't know where I got this in my head, the permission to go in and arrange it. I thought if he doesn't like it, then we'll just do each individual take. But I arranged it French, Spanish, however it felt to me as a jazz musician, that it felt right, kind of like Billy Strayhorn working with a brilliant Ellington score. And I went in that morning on Monday, I handed it to him, and I said, "Here's the 21 pages, English, Spanish, and French." He said, "Okay." And I said, "And here is what I kind of put together. It's like 10 pages. And he said, "Well, let's see it." And Naomi and Laura were up in the balcony, and the whole thing was right there on that big stage. And I showed it to him. And the moment that he hit the stage, came out of the darkness to me, the look on his face, the light in his eyes, and the aces, Richard, I just knew he understood everything that I had done.
No Hay Banda, and yet we hear a band. If we want to hear a clarinet, listen. Un trombone a colis. Un trombone can sordina. J'aime le son du trombone en sordine.
I just intuitively knew that intimately he had gotten it all. I felt it when I was performing it, that he was with me, that he loved it. And I've talked to other actors. The best audience they ever had in their life was David Lynch. He was like this excited kid that just emanated joy when you hit it. It was quite an amazing feeling. It was enough to not stop me from acting, but allow me to move off. I never needed another acting role. I'd love to do some more challenging acting roles. It's fun for me, but I never needed to do it again, because once we had done that, I knew that we had done something unique. When I was in Cannes with him, my band opened the Cannes market that year. I had a 14-piece new swing band for the movie 7 Year Zigzag. It was crazy. And then I walked the red carpet with David. That feeling of intimately being understood, just somebody really just gets you, was exactly what happened when I sat down and interviewed him 20-something years later about Catherine. He just let the veil fall. It was me and him, and it was Donna Dubain, our executive producer, who passed just weeks before he did. She was on the other side of the camera. And there are these wonderful moments when David looks at you, it looks like he's looking into eternity and finding emotion and inspiration, and then he'll turn back to me and finish the sentence. It's Donna. Donna's there. He's talking to both of us. It was the same thing I got from Mulholland Dr. It was this incredible connection, this openness. We got each other. And, we weren't buddies. I visited his studio. I never went to his home. We knew each other over 50 years. We worked on 3 projects together. I don't know Jack, Mulholland Drive, and I know Catherine, the Log Lady. And lucky for the collaboration. It changed my life.
That sounds amazing. Were there any questions that he wouldn't answer or obfuscated about?
There was one question. No. I'm going to not get myself into deep trouble here.
Fair enough.
It was an area that we did not address. We never talked about it. It was understood we weren't going to address it. And when I asked a question that he thought was skirting it, I saw him go, oh. He realized I wasn't. So I can't answer that, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I really loved his story about, loved is kind of a funny word, but when he tells about Catherine's near-death experience when she threw up her stomach lining, the way he tells it is like the most Lynchian visual description ever.
And all of a sudden, she goes... bright red spray, boo, and this thing, and this flop, a giant fish plopped onto her robe, blood everywhere.
And then I read that story was a 3-part story that stemmed from one question. Is that true?
Yeah.
What was the one question?
Did Catherine meditate?
Wow.
I didn't know that they had started together. I didn't know any of it. I knew that he meditated. This is a little bit of an insight. I knew that he meditated because when I was at the Cannes Film Festival for my 2 movies, which were in the market, not in the festival, and the band played the opening thing, and then I ran into David. I wasn't invited to come to Mulholland Drive premiere. I ran into David the day after the opening, and I saw David in a parking lot. He said, Richard, David, did you see the performance last night? He said, no, I just got here. I was like, oh. And he said, are you coming to the premiere of Mulholland Drive? And I said, are you inviting me? He said, yeah. So me and Donna Dubain, who was there with me, our producer, got to walk the red carpet with David. Then we hung out for a couple of days. He had a big entourage there. Everybody, including Eli Roth, the horror meister. He was there because he had made a short film and David loved it and brought him with everybody to Cannes. They were all into TM. And I thought this is culty. Because I'd heard about TM. You pay money and they give you a word and you say the word and you get to meditate.
Yeah.
I thought that was weird. Once I did the interview with David, once he told that elaborate story about Catherine, but also a couple of other things he said during the interview that aren't in the film, I thought this would benefit me. A, it's about stress reduction, and I was entering a stressful period of my life. But B, it might help me understand David and Catherine's relationship and who they were and how they viewed things. Mm-hmm. And so I took the training, and it's been wonderful for me. I'm convinced and avid that it's a great psychological, physical, spiritual technique that everybody who can should learn, because it has just immediate benefits. The culty part, the religious part, very separate from the techniques. And the wonderful thing about the David Lynch Foundation, which David started and funded and is just doing great work, is that they train soldiers with PTSD. They train battered and abused women. They train at-risk kids in this technique that reduces stress.
Yeah.
And I've been very, very grateful for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, we could all use a little stress reduction these days.
Yes, we sure could.
So I read that you didn't watch The Return until after you finished filming the documentary, and then you watched it from beginning to end to look for ways to fill in the blanks.
Both David and I, in our conversations, did not want this to be a movie about Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
We knew that we were funded largely by Twin Peaks backers and fans on Kickstarter. The Twin Peaks community would love this. And once I had the interview with David, it was just so clear that we could just release the interview and we'd have a movie, right?
Yeah.
But both of us felt that what was extraordinary about Catherine's life was who she was as a person. And that was colored by what she had done in her life. And Twin Peaks was a portion of it, a big portion, an important one, but a portion of it. So my decision was, let me do all of the interviews. Let me talk to all of her friends from all of these different areas so that what I'm putting in my hard drive has a balance, gives us the whole sense of life. Then I can go in and see what will work from Twin Peaks to help us explain that. So I didn't watch The Return when it came out. I conducted over 60 interviews before I sat down and watched every episode of Twin Peaks from beginning to end twice.
Oh, wow.
First time, just to sit down and watch them and absorb it. And it was a pretty strange period in my life because that's all I was doing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I have had a wonderful relationships and I have a great son and I was doing stuff in life. But then I'd come into the studio, I'd spend 8 to 10 hours a day just entering this world, right? I didn't have to do anything else, just absorb it. So it was like binge watching with a purpose. All the way through, all 3 seasons, all the Log Lady intros, Fire Walk with Me, interviews, anything that had been done. Once I had done that, once I'd watched over 100 hours of our own interviews, once I'd watched, I think it's like 90 hours of Twin Peaks material, there might be more, I can't remember what the figure is. Once I'd watched that, that's when I started to sit down and just go through and select the things that I thought related both. In each interview, it was a reductive process. The first listen to the interview was take out all the questions because I just was going to work with the statements.
Yeah.
Right? Questions were irrelevant. It's what are people saying? Because the film is structured as an ongoing conversation amongst all of Catherine's friends. It just starts and people keep talking and adding to what they're saying. And so the questions were irrelevant. And once I did that, I then watched all of the Twin Peaks again and pulled things that I thought were relevant. Then there was a period that took a long time where I structured it into beats, the different aspects of her life and different thematic elements. Then I watched all of the interviews again. If one of the interviews talked about dancing, then it went into the dancing sequence. And if somebody else talked about Twin Peaks, I listened to every interview again and put it into its place. Then I had all of these, basically, we called them elements, these scenes, some of which were 30, 40 minutes long, talking about the subject of her breasts, right? Because they were breasts. So it was a very reductive process. Keep sort of, cooking it. There was an analogy at one point about the difference between making a bottle of wine. Oh, it's that we had to make a 3-part miniseries before we could make the feature. Right? We couldn't go the other way.
Yeah.
We knew there was more material than was available for a feature. So we did the 3-part so that we really told the story in depth. And then from there, it's like taking wine and making cognac. You have to reduce it, distill it down, and it has all of the essence of everything that's in the larger piece.
Yeah.
We're hoping that if this film is successful, if people see it, that maybe there will be a market for the deeper, larger story, which I hope is the case because I think it's wonderful and that much more David and that much more Catherine.
Yeah. I would definitely watch that. I was really moved by, I think you said that one of the first interviews you conducted was with Bill Hougsey, Catherine's ex-husband. And he mentions that he says something like, I wasn't going to do this because it would paint me in a bad light.
In the film, actually, he talks about that. Bill was obviously very, very close to Catherine, and the first person I talked to about this film was Donna Dubain, our executive producer and one of my closest friends. And she took me to Jenny Sullivan, who became our producer, and convinced her that this was worth doing with me and that she'd give me some room. And then we went to Bill Hougsey, and Bill really wanted to direct it. He's a wonderful, talented filmmaker. He was nominated for an Oscar for Hoop Dreams as an editor. But I felt that his personal perspective would limit the picture that I wanted to paint of Catherine. I supported him in making an attempt, and he shot a couple of interviews, some of which is in the film, and then felt that he didn't have a handle on it. that's to his credit to be able to say, this isn't for me. And it wasn't until after my interview with David, Bill wasn't there, but I did the interview and then I showed it to Bill and Bill got on board with the project. But he was still very reluctant to do an interview. And at one point he said he wasn't going to do one. And my honest opinion is the reason that it was such a successful interview with Bill is that, again, it was me interviewing him, then the camera to my right. And on the other side of that was Jenny. And Jenny was one of Catherine's closest friends and was probably one of the people who condemned Bill's behavior when he treated her badly all those years ago. And though Catherine forgave him and brought him back into the fold at the very end of his life, and everybody, all of her friends who were there, were open to Bill and didn't alienate him, a lot of trouble in his life, I don't think that they ever gave him the forgiveness that he sought. So I think that this interview that he gave me with Jenny right there was kind of a mea culpa. It was kind of his opportunity to cleanse himself of his own guilt for how he'd behaved previously. And the beauty of the interview and the gratitude that I have to Bill as a human being is that he ripped it open.
Yeah.
He gave it all to us. And I think that even in the course of the making of that interview, he found some absolution. And he was at our big Hollywood screening at the Egyptian. And I think he felt quite good about what he'd done and what we had done. And I'm grateful to him for all of his help on this film.
I'm so glad to hear that, because I did find his interviews so honest and raw, and it's actually just so rare to see someone have so much hindsight and understanding and just honesty. It was so moving. So I'm really glad that he felt like he could do that and that you were able to convince him to do that. So you managed to assemble quite an impressive cast of interviews. Was there anyone that you wanted to interview but you couldn't get them?
Besides Catherine?
Yes, yeah.
I know that Majid Amick and I made a strong attempt to get together. I even actually was in New York at the same time. We were trying to do it. And she's a really, really lovely woman who we spoke to afterward. So it would have been nice to have Majid's interview. I was sort of following who was available and when. Subsequently, I've had a wonderful conversation with Ray Weiss, who I hope will come to our Glendale screenings this week. I think he has some wonderful stories to tell. There are a bunch of people who I wish that I had had the opportunity to interview. There are people that you don't see in the film that we did interview that are wonderful as well. But it's just, my father had a saying that I've lived by as an artist, which is the mind can only absorb what the ass can take. So if people are fidgeting, if it's too long, or if you haven't got the cut quite right, you really have to be aware of our ways our minds absorb information. It's not just how much or how long. It's what comes in, what goes out, how we are used to perceiving things. So there are some wonderful movies that are very slow that current generations are not used to the idea of. And yet, because we're all still people, and our nervous systems are the same, whether you're 20 or 70, people are rediscovering these, the Bergman films where you could linger for 30 seconds on a shot of the ocean and nothing changes except a little bit of the ocean, the whitecaps.
Yeah.
But you're in this temporal experience where a director, a master, is taking you from one end to the other. And time can slow down and speed up and all of those wonderful things that can happen. But you have to be human and responding in a human way, and then other humans can do the same. It's why it's nice to see him in a screen.
That is so true.
Who gives a fucking shit how long a scene is?
I know that you had 6.5 hours of footage and you basically were going to try to do a 3-part series and then whittle it down. What was the hardest thing to cut? The thing that you were saddest to cut?
We have hundreds of hours, over 100 hours of original footage.
Oh, gosh, okay. Yeah.
The first cut that we showed anybody was 6.5 hours.
Okay.
Broken into 9 sections, and it was unillustrated. It was just the truth, just the facts, man. One talking after another in this kind of conversational format. And that was then cut down to a 3-part miniseries, and then it was cut down to a feature. And the hardest thing to leave on the cutting room floor?
Yes.
Wow, that's a tough one. I can't answer that question, but I'll give you an answer. This morning I was told we got an email or a response on Facebook from a gentleman by the name of Joe Romano. Joe Romano's wife, Lisa Loomer, is in the movie. She's the dark-haired woman who talks about life and what the dead tell us. And Catherine, she's there at the end saying how funny that was, a high sense of humor.
Catherine, are you dying?
Yeah, but not at the moment.
I'm Catherine. I'm very sorry to hear about that.
About what?
Your situation.
Oh, I'm dead, I'm dying. Oh, it's okay. It happens to us all.
You're right.
And Joe is a brilliant composer and horn player. And he was very essential in helping Catherine get through the chemo. He was her chemo partner in Ashland and a very close friend of hers. And he moved me very much. It's all in the 3-part miniseries, but we just couldn't go that deep into that physical part of her illness in this. It was a distraction from the through line and the thrust of the story. He sent us a nice note today, and I went, not only I'm sorry that Joe isn't in it, this version of it, but that the audience doesn't get to see the humanity of that man and his perspective of Catherine. I regret that one being on the cutting room floor, but hopefully we'll get that 3-part out there at some point, and everybody will get to see Mr. Joe Romano be a great friend to Catherine.
Thank you. I would watch any length cut of this film, just so you know. So. Can't get enough. Well, thank you so much. This has been an absolute delight talking to you.
A pleasure for me, and I hope we get to do it again.
Yes, I'd love to have you on the podcast as a guest sometime if you're interested.
I would, anytime, seriously, absolutely be happy to do a podcast with you anytime. I really appreciate your questions and your perspective of the film. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye. I Know Catherine the Log Lady is currently screening at independent theaters across the country. So check your local listings and follow the film on Instagram and Blue Sky at Log Lady Film, and also on iknowcatherine.com. You can also follow Hammer to Nail for the latest in independent film reviews, previews, and interviews on Blue Sky and Instagram at Hammer to Nail, and on their website, hammertonail.com. If you enjoyed this episode of Really Weird Stuff, please take a minute to give us 5 stars on your preferred podcast app, especially Apple and Spotify. If you did not enjoy this episode, no further action is necessary. Follow us on Instagram at Really Weird Stuff Pod, on Blue Sky at Really Weird Stuff, on our website, reallyweirdstuffpod.com, and on YouTube at Really Weird Stuff Pod. Really Weird Stuff, a Twin Peaks podcast, is hosted by Jessica Baxter and Amy Green. Music by Angelo Badalamenti, Julie Cruz, and Jessica Baxter. Produced and edited by Divine Betty Media. Thank you for listening. One day, the sadness will end.